Hey painters, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about red and green, our colors of the week. Complementary colors, once again, they're across from each other on the color wheel. They make each other more vibrant when they are next to each other. And when they're mixed together, they actually dull each other down or desaturate each other. And so those are how we painters like to utilize them to best effect when we want something to look sort of dynamic and attention grabbing. We might put complementary colors right next to each other, and our eye will generally go straight for that. So I wanted to show you that color combination here. I have it here. And also to talk about the different reds and different greens that are on your palette and how you might utilize those reds when working from life. So if I were looking at, a little cherry tomato and I wanted to paint that, I might first look at the colors right out of the tube that I have, an alizarin crimson and a cadmium red, and think about, well, which one of these would I head toward? And I think probably for the base of that color, I would head first for my cadmium red rather than my alizarin crimson. But just on looking at the shadow end of things, I might think, well, what if I mix some alizarin crimson into the red to make it a little darker, maybe even a little cooler in areas that I wanted to. So I think that is just the first start of looking, and when you're dealing with red and green, looking around you and thinking about identifying the quality of those reds. If I go back to this red and I look at these together, I even notice a difference between these two. One is brighter and perhaps lighter in value. We talked about the value of color, but perhaps also maybe even a tiny bit cooler. So maybe if I were mixing that, I'd be mixing a tiny bit of that alizarin crimson in there. So reds, we could talk about many more. I will say that pink is also part of a red, and there's a pink fabric. Here's a magenta pink part of a toothbrush. I'm just grabbing things from around my house. And so I think both of those might head more toward the alizarin crimson. So if you were trying to mix this type of pink, you might start with your alizarin crimson to go for that, and you might do the same with this type of pink. You may end up adding a little bit of the cadmium red, but it probably has more base in the crimson. So greens, we've got a lime here, and I love looking at natural objects because they have a lot of variety in them. And even one side to another has variety. So if I'm looking at this green through the color wheel here, I might kind of head toward this sort of green that was made by ultramarine blue and yellow. This is the same but with more yellow. The yellow green I might head toward, and the blue green made by ultramarine and yellow. And a little less so toward the viridian green straight. But the more you kind of look at them together, you could see that, well, there might be a small quantity of that too, depending on how the light's hitting it. And certainly this is viridian green mixed with yellow. A little bit of that in the most vibrant parts where the warm light is hitting it. If I turn it over, it really heads a lot more yellow. And so you're thinking more about the yellow green, maybe a yellow green here with a little more. So this is the beginning of interpreting reds and greens separately. If you saw this little rubber band, you might be like, that's a very cool kind of blue-green, and maybe you would start with your viridian for that. And the same with this very adorable teddy bear. Definitely has some relationship to that blue-green, and you can identify that pretty quickly. So that's, again, the blues and the greens. The reds and the greens. Looking at more muted colors, so I had mentioned that when red and green are mixed together, they dilute or desaturate each other, dull each other down. And we see that in nature. This is a green avocado. It's got lots of speckles, and those speckles are a neutral, but they still head toward a sort of greenish, right? The way that you might mix something like that is going first toward the types of greens that seem very close to it, right? And then to get some of this deeper, if you're using complements, you could mix a green like this with an alizarin crimson and come up with something very similar to this neutral, desaturated green. And you'll find that when you're doing the paper color exercise that we're going to do dealing with this limited palette. But I just wanted to show you how that occurs in nature and where you would utilize that. So here's a little baby potato, kind of a reddish potato, but it has a lot of neutralizing going on. So if you were trying to figure out this, it's pinkish. Does it have maybe a little bit more toward the alizarin crimson type pink? Maybe it has a little bit of the cadmium red, but it also needs dulling down. And the way you would do that is by thinking about mixing a green, its complement to it. That is not an intuitive thing to do, but it's putting color theory into action as a painter, and you will come up with colors that are very naturalistic and mimic what you are seeing if you know how to use that theory. So I wanted to just give you that little brief exercise for fun, and just in terms of how we would interpret the world around us in color and observational color that is really important to the painter, right? To, even if you don't paint naturalistically or from life, to understand it as you're seeing it and to start thinking about how would I mix that color. And that's the beginning of becoming a painter. All right, more soon.